Orchestrated fresh revenge memoir with new characters, plot, and setting while preserving emotional structure. Orchestrated fresh revenge memoir with new characters, plot, and setting while preserving emotional structure. I found my daughter in the reeds below the old grist mill, half sunk in the river mud, barely breathing. She got the words out one at a time, like each one cost her something. His stepmother did this, said our blood was swamp trash, said it would never wash clean enough to sit at their table. I carried her up the bank to my truck, and before my hands even stopped shaking, I sent my brother 3 words he would understand without asking. It's our turn. Time for what Granddaddy taught us. The phone had rung while I was coming back from the Saturday market in Eulonia, with a flat of the last good peaches and a sack of pecans I meant to shell for pie. October down here doesn't get cold so much as wet, a damp that climbs up under your collar and settles in your knees. And I had the heater going in my old Ford as I came along the river road. I'm a widow. My husband's been gone 11 years now. I worked 31 years in the county tax office over in the courthouse, kept the property ledgers and the lien books, retired with a clock I never wind, and a pension that covers the lights and not much else. My name is Odessa. Most folks around here just call me Miss Odie. I'm 63, and there's not much about a column of numbers that can hide from me, because I spent half my life reading the lies people tell on paper. The number on the screen I didn't know. I answered anyway, slowing down on a stretch where the asphalt gives out to packed clay. Is this Odessa Pruitt? A man's voice, out of breath, gravel in it. It is. Ma'am, you better come on. The old Ferris mill down by the landing, you know it? I did. I'd known it my whole life. I run trot lines down here. I found a young woman in the water. She's hurt bad. Got your name on a card in her pocket. Says you're her mama. The bottom dropped out of me. I don't even remember turning the truck around. I remember the back end fishtailing in the clay and a peach rolling off the seat and bursting on the floorboard, and I remember the word that filled my whole head and left no room for anything else. My daughter, my only child, 34 years old, sharp as a tack, stubborn as her father, married 8 years now to a man named Preston, whose people had more money than God, and looked at me like I'd tracked something in. She'd moved up to Savannah into a house with a name. She called less and less, and when she did, everything was always fine. Mama, don't fuss. And I let myself believe it, because that's what you do when your child won't let you closer. You stand at the door she leaves cracked, and you wait. The man at the landing was named Otis, a wiry fellow about my age in waders, and he'd done right by her. He dragged her clear of the current and laid his own coat under her head, and was kneeling there talking low to keep her with him. I went down that bank on legs that weren't mine. When I saw her, I didn't know her for a second. Her face was swollen out of true, one eye gone to a slit, her bottom lip split, her hair matted black with mud and blood. Her left arm lay at an angle that turned my stomach, a clean break. I could see it even in the grey light. Her good coat, the camel one I'd helped her pick, was rags. Baby, I went down in the mud beside her. Mama's here, I'm right here. Her good eye found me, and she tried to smile, and it broke my heart in half. Mama, she breathed. Don't take me to the hospital. Hush now, don't talk. But she had it in her like a fever, and she had to get it out. She told me. His stepmother, Genevieve, drove her out here under the pretense of looking at some lakefront lot the family was buying, and instead took a tire knocker to her in the trees and left her in the river to go cold. She told me about the babies. That's how I learned I was going to be a grandmother, kneeling in the mud, hearing it from a mouth that could barely shape the words. 11 weeks! They hadn't told a soul, and she told me the why, which I'd have laughed at if I'd had any laughing in me. She'd found out the family was robbing the old folks. I sent Otis back up to flag down the EMS and tell them it was a false call, a mistake. The woman been found by family and was already on her way to Brunswick. He looked at me a long time. "Mom," he said, "she might be broke inside. You don't fool with that." "I know it better than you do," I told him. "I sat with the dying for years before I ever touched a ledger, and I'm telling you, if she goes into that county hospital tonight, the people who did this to her will know exactly where she is by morning. They owned half this part of the state." He chewed on that, and then he nodded slow, the way a man does when he's decided to trust his own gut against his better sense, and he went up to turn the ambulance around. I have thought about Otis many times since. There are still men in this world who will lie to the law for a stranger because a thing is right. I didn't get his last name. I wish I had. I got my daughter into the cab of that truck, inch by inch, both of us crying without sound, and I drove her home with the lights off until we hit the county road. And somewhere on that black stretch of road I took one hand off the wheel, and I texted my brother, Solomon, 2 years older than me, 26 years a homicide detective up in Macon before his hip put him out, a man who says about 4 words an hour and means every one of them. He's the only living soul besides me who sat at our grandfather's knee. Granddaddy Eli came up under Jim Crow, worked the rail yards, learned how to be where nobody looked, and to keep a record of everything in a hand so small you'd need a glass to read it. He used to say it to us when we were small and the other children threw the ugly words, "Don't ever let them see you coming." Solomon texted back inside a minute. "On my way. Don't call nobody else. Pull the battery out your phones. They can ride a phone right to your door." My house sits on 6 acres at the end of a dirt lane, the same plank house my grandmother kept, and it met us dark and quiet and smelling of wood smoke from the morning's fire. I got my daughter onto the sofa and built the fire back up and turned every lamp low. Then I did what these hands have done 1,000 times. I cleaned her wounds, and I splinted that wrist, and I taped 2 ribs I was near certain were cracked, and I gave her what I had in the cabinet that was safe for a woman carrying. The whole time she kept her good hand pressed flat to her belly like she was holding a door shut. When I'd done what I could, I sat down beside her and made her tell me the rest, slow, with water between the hard parts. My son-in-law sat on the board of the family company. Magnolia Grove, they call it, a string of those pretty assisted living places with the rocking chairs out front and the magnolia stamped on the brochure. 11 of them now across 3 states. His stepmother runs the whole thing. She'd asked my daughter, who passed her CPA exam the same spring she got married, to help square the books for the annual filing because the regular man had taken sick. My daughter went into those numbers the way I taught her, the way Granddaddy taught me, and what she found made the floor tilt. Ghost vendors, companies with names like Coastal Care Consulting that drew 6-figure checks every quarter for services nobody could point to, every last one of them set up a few weeks before the money started moving. The owners listed as people my daughter looked up and found to be either long dead or living in a trailer somewhere with no idea their name was on anything. Medicaid getting billed for therapies that never happened to residents who'd already passed. And the part that put the iron in my spine, the personal needs accounts, the little trust funds where an old woman's social security goes so she can buy her grandbabies a birthday card, drained a few dollars at a time across hundreds of residents until it added up to a fortune. They were stealing from people who couldn't remember being robbed. "I gave her a chance," my daughter whispered, and even now there was shame in it. I went to her before I went to anybody. I thought, she's family, there has to be something I'm not seeing. I asked her to explain it to me. And she offered to drive you out to look at a lot, I said. I'm not slow. She nodded against my shoulder and broke. She'd photographed every page before she ever opened her mouth, thank God, dozens of them, and the photos were still on her phone because Genevieve had been so sure it would read like a robbery that she'd left the bag. The passcode was the day we buried my husband. My grandbaby's mother, grown and married into a mansion, still carried her people with her into that cold water. While she slept, I made myself useful, because a body that keeps moving can't fall down. And it was moving around the truck with a flashlight in my teeth that I found it. Up under the driver's seat, zip-tied to the frame, a little black box no bigger than a matchbook with a pinhole light blinking steady. Preston had insisted on having her car serviced at his family's dealership back in the summer. I knelt in my own yard and I understood that they'd been able to put a finger on my girl any hour of any day for months. I pried it loose and carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table next to her phone, and I sat down and looked at the two of them, and felt 63 years old. Solomon came up the lane a little before 4 with no headlights, the way Granddaddy taught us to come, and he stood in my kitchen, still in his coat, and looked at the tracker for a long moment. "You didn't move it," he said. "I just got it out an hour ago." "Good. Don't throw it in the creek. Don't smash it. That just tells them when you found it." He turned it over in his big hands. "There's a fella I know runs reefer loads to Texas, leaves the truck stop at Darien before dawn. This rides west on the underside of his trailer, and it gives anybody watching a nice straight line to El Paso. That's my brother. 26 years reading the small mean cleverness of people, and not 1 ounce of it wasted. He went in and looked at my daughter sleeping, and his jaw worked. Then he sat down with me and we did what our grandfather raised us to do, which is not to rage but to plan. We talked till the windows went grey. We couldn't stay at my house. Solomon said it plain. Too open. The pines come right to the back fence. Anybody with patience could sit out there a week. By full morning he'd already had a phone call on the little prepaid he'd bought at a gas station, with a retired ER doctor he'd known since the academy, a no-nonsense woman named Pruitt who agreed to drive down from Brunswick that very day and look my daughter over properly, the baby and all. And he'd thought of the place, our grandfather's old camp out on Pell's Branch, a one-room cypress house on stilts above the black water where Granddaddy took us to fish before either of us was tall enough to see over the gunwale. No road to it worth the name, 12 miles of dirt, and then a track you'd miss if you didn't know it was there. I hadn't set foot in it in 20 years. Dr. Pruitt came at noon, a square woman with cropped grey hair and a field bag, and she examined my daughter on my own bed with the curtains drawn. She had a little battery ultrasound, the kind they carry to disasters, and she ran it slow and quiet across my daughter's belly while I held my breath and prayed without moving my lips. "There's your heartbeat," she said finally, and the relief in that room had a weight to it. Placenta's where it ought to be. This baby's holding on tight. Then she set the wrist that I'd splinted right, confirmed the 2 ribs, called the head injury a concussion, and told my daughter a week flat on her back, no arguments. Before she left, she took my brother out on the porch, but the walls of my house are thin, and I heard her tell him this was no robbery and no fit of temper. Whoever did it, she said, knew where to hit to make it last. Solomon thanked her and walked her to her car, and when he came back, his face had gone to stone. We left for the camp at dusk so the failing light would cover us. Solomon drove the truck slow with no lights down the back way. My daughter and I rode the bench seat with a quilt over us both. And she winced at every rut but never said a word. My brave girl. We left the tracker behind. By then his trucker friend already had it riding west, and any satellite watching my Ford would read it sitting still in my own driveway. The camp came up out of the dark like something from a dream I'd forgotten I had. The cypress gone silver, the branch water black as poured oil under it. Solomon got a fire going in the little potbelly and lit a lantern, and the place smelled of cold ash and river and our childhood. And I got my daughter settled on the bottom bunk, and for the first time since the landing, I let myself believe we might come out the other side of this. Out there with the lantern between us, my brother went to work. He brought a laptop that never touched the internet, and a stack of printouts his old friends had pulled, men and women still inside who could read a man's whole life off a screen for the price of a favor between people who'd worn the badge. The picture they built was worse than my daughter knew. Magnolia Grove had been bleeding money sideways for going on 6 years, near $11 million run through those paper companies and out the back. And 6 years back, Solomon said, turning a page so the lantern lit it, a reporter from the Savannah paper had started sniffing at exactly this. He'd put in 3 records requests, and then his brakes had failed on a bridge approach, and he'd spent the last 5 years feeding himself with a straw. The story died in the hospital with him. But that wasn't the thing that would save us. The thing that would save us was personal. Genevieve, it turned out, was not loyal even to the money she stole. Tucked off in accounts under her maiden name, careful as a cat, sat better than $2 million her husband knew nothing about, and a piece of it ran on into a joint account with a man named Royce, who managed one of the family's own properties and was 20 years her junior. My brother laid it out the way he'd laid out 100 cases to 100 juries. "The husband won't lift a finger over the old folks," he said. "That's other people's money, and a man like that figures his lawyers can paper over anything. But this—" He tapped the page. "She's hidden money from him, and she's hidden a man that he'll never forgive because that's his." My son-in-law's father, Harlan Ashford, 65 years old, built the whole thing up out of one nursing home his first wife's family owned. That first wife, my daughter told me, had died of cancer when Preston was a boy, and Harlan had married Genevieve 2 years later, and they'd lived more or less separate lives ever since, joined at the checkbook and nothing else. He spent his days on the business. She spent hers chairing charity galas and getting her picture in the society pages. He was hard, my daughter said, but he was square in his own cold way. He would never love us, but he might use us. And right then, that was worth more than love. I asked her about my son-in-law because the question had been sitting in my chest like a stone. Why, in 3 days, had her own husband not torn the county apart looking for her? She looked at the lantern a long while before she answered. Genevieve had told him there'd been a blow-up, that my daughter had stormed off to stay with her mama to cool down, and not to call and give her the satisfaction. And he believed it, or chose to, the way he'd chosen to believe every small lie his stepmother ever told him, because Preston Ashford was 41 years old and still could not put on a tie without his daddy's wife telling him which one. That was the man my girl married. I held my tongue. There would be time. The days at the camp ran long and quiet and afraid. Dr. Pruitt came twice more down that washboard track. The bruises on my daughter's face turned the colors of a bad sunset and then began, slowly, to fade. I kept her fed on what I could cook on a potbelly stove, grits and eggs and the kind of slow attention that is the only medicine I've ever fully trusted. I never left her alone in that cabin, not once. When Solomon went out to a payphone in the next town to make his calls, I stayed. When I stepped to the porch for air, the door stayed open, and she stayed in my sight. I had read enough of those true crime accounts to know how women die, alone, in an out-of-the-way place, because somebody decided they'd be fine for an hour. The fear had a face one night. I was at the window when I saw headlights cut across the far bank of the branch. Slow, searching, then stop. They sat there a long minute with the engine ticking over while my heart climbed up into my throat, and then they backed and turned and went away. Solomon stood beside me in the dark with Granddaddy's old pistol low against his leg, the Colt our grandfather had carried legal his whole life, and that I'd kept oiled in a drawer for no reason I could have named until now. Hunters, maybe, he said, but he didn't believe it, and neither did I, and we kept a watch in shifts till the sky went pink. By the fourth day, Solomon said we couldn't sit and wait to be found. We would go to Harlan Ashford ourselves. Not the sheriff, the DA in that county had been to 3 of Genevieve's galas, and a man doesn't bite the hand that fills his campaign coffers. We would go straight to the top of the family and give the old man a reason to clean his own house. Solomon sent it through a man who knew how to send a thing so it couldn't be traced. A few of the photographs, a page of the hidden accounts, and 4 sentences with no threat in them, only an offer to meet. A public place, the Live Oak Diner downtown, 6 o'clock the next evening. Come alone. The reply came back inside the hour. We'll be there. So will I, alone. You come without an entourage as well. Solomon read it and almost smiled. Course he won't come alone, he said. Neither will we. My daughter wanted to go. She tried to sit up and the pain folded her right back down, and even she had to admit it. This is my fight, Mama. It's all of ours, I told her, and your part of it is to keep that baby safe and let your uncle and me do what we were raised to do. She didn't like it. I was glad she didn't. The fight was coming back into her, and a woman is going to need her fight. Solomon and I drove into Savannah the next evening with 3 of his old partners already inside the diner, 1 at the counter, 2 at a back booth, all of them retired, all of them having seen worse than this and come home. The city was loud after a week of branch water and night birds. We parked 2 streets over and walked in like what we were, a greying woman and her brother. Nobody you'd look at twice. Harlan Ashford was already at a corner table, a tall man with silver at his temples and a face that gave away nothing but the white of his knuckles around a coffee cup. 2 men sat one table over trying hard to look like they weren't with him. Solomon went first and I came a minute behind and sat. I won't drag it out. We laid it on the table the way you lay out a hand you know is good. The photographs of my daughter's ruined face first, while she was still his unborn grandchild's mother. He looked at them and a muscle in his jaw jumped, but his voice stayed even. Then Solomon played a recording, my daughter's own broken voice naming Genevieve, naming the tire iron, naming the swamp trash and the blood. The old man listened to all of it without moving, then the ledgers, the ghost companies, the drained accounts of the old and the dying. He turned those pages slow, and I watched a man do arithmetic about his own life. Suppose it's true, he said at last, in a voice like a door closing. What is it you people want? Money? Justice, I said, and my daughter and my grandbaby safe for the rest of their lives. His eyes came up to mine, and for the first time there was something behind them. You understand, a public scandal burns down 30 years of my work along with her. We're not after the public, Solomon said. We're after the woman who beat a pregnant girl half to death and left her in a river, that's all. And then Solomon set down the last folder, and that was the one that turned him. The accounts under the maiden name. The young man named Royce. The photographs that went with it. Harlan Ashford opened that folder, and his hands, those steady hands, were not steady anymore. He closed it and set it down very gently, the way you set down something that might go off. "What do you want?" he said again. But it was a different question now. A divorce for my daughter, clean and well provided. A guarantee that woman never came within 100 miles of her or the child. And the whole thing kept quiet on both sides. No police, no press, no story that could ever touch any of us. He looked at us a long time, then he said he'd handle Genevieve himself in his own way, and that no, there'd be no blood on it, but that for a woman like her, losing the name and the standing and the money was worse than anything we could do with our hands. We shook on it across the formica. He had a grandfather's first true thought already moving behind his eyes. I could see it, though neither of us knew yet how far it would carry him. It went the way he said. Inside 3 days the papers were drawn. Genevieve was given a choice, prison or exile, and she chose to disappear into some town in Central America with a small allowance and an iron condition never to come back or make contact. Royce was fired before lunch. My son-in-law was told only that his stepmother had committed crimes and had to leave the country, and not one word about what had been done to his wife, because his own father had taken his measure long ago and found him too soft to be trusted with the whole truth. Harlan took the company back into his own hands, called in auditors, quietly made the old people's accounts whole, and ate the loss without a sound. We moved my daughter into a house Harlan deeded over to her free and clear in a quiet town up the river, a wide cypress place with a porch made for sitting, near enough to a doctor and far enough from the world. She healed there through the winter. The bruises left her face entirely, the bones knit, the dreams took longer, and there were nights I'd hear her cry out and go sit on the edge of her bed and stroke her hair the way I did when she was 6, until she went under again. I thought we were at the end of it. We weren't, not quite. In April, with the dogwoods out, Harlan asked to meet her, and he came alone in a plain coat with no driver, and what he brought made the whole thing turn over one more terrible time. He'd kept digging in his own house, and he'd found the truth about the first baby, the one my daughter lost 2 years back, the one the doctors had blamed on stress and overwork. It hadn't been stress. Genevieve had been having something slipped into her tea for weeks, a thing that empties a womb, paid for under one of those false names, and the part that took the air out of the room. Harlan had it from the woman who used to keep my daughter's house. Preston knew. My son-in-law had known what his stepmother was doing to his own wife and his own child, and he had stood by and let it happen because there was a clause in the family trust that made him a man of his own only when he fathered an heir, and Genevieve was not about to let go of him that easy. My daughter didn't cry. I had braced for it, and it didn't come. She got up and went to the window and stood in the spring light with both hands on the round of her belly, and when she turned around her face was the calmest I'd seen it in months, and there was a clean white anger in it that I recognized, because it was my grandmother's anger and her grandmother's before that. "I blamed myself for 2 years," she said. "I thought I'd done something wrong." Then she closed the folder and asked Harlan what he meant to do with it, and he said nothing. The proof wouldn't hold in any court, and she said good, because that woman was already paid, and Preston would carry it the rest of his life whether anybody charged him or not. And she said she was done looking backward. She had a daughter coming. Harlan Ashford apologized to her then, plainly, a hard man saying he had been too busy and too blind to see what was being done under his own roof, and he asked, almost shy, if she might let him be a grandfather to the child. He was 65, he said. The boy he'd raised had turned out hollow. This baby was the only future his name had left. My daughter looked at him a long while, and then she told him yes, on her terms, Genevieve never in the picture, and Preston never to play at being a father when it suited him. And she told him the baby would carry our name, Pruitt, not Ashford, and the old man took that the way a man takes a bill he knows he owes. He said he understood. He said he hoped that blood she came from, the very blood his wife had spit on, would do this family some good, since his own had run thin. He didn't say it ugly. I believe he meant it. She came in June, on the kind of morning when the river throws up fog and the whole world smells green. 14 hours my daughter laboured, and I held her hand through every one of them, and a little after 7 that evening her daughter came into the world hollering with both fists going, healthy and furious and alive. My granddaughter. My daughter laid her on her own chest and said the name we'd settled on weeks before. The name of the woman who started us, the proud, hard, beautiful woman who married against the whole weight of a county and held her head up till the day she died, and passed that down through my mother to me, to my girl, and now to this one. Mahalia, out in the hall, leaning on the wall with a foolish, ridiculous balloon, was Harlan Ashford, who had driven 2 hours to stand there, and when I told him the baby's name he said it back twice like he was learning a word in a language he wished he'd known sooner. He's gone overseas now for a surgery on his heart that the doctors say he can't put off, and he promised my granddaughter he'd come back and finish teaching her to fish, and I believe he will, because a man who keeps a hard promise to his enemies will move heaven to keep an easy one to a child. Preston came one day in August while we were on the porch shelling butter beans, drove up in a fine car looking 10 years older than his age, and stood at the bottom of the steps and asked to see his daughter. My girl stood up slow and put herself between him and that baby, and she didn't yell. She told him a father is a man who stands between his child and harm, and he had known what was coming, and he had let it come, and that was an answer she'd already lived. She told him Mahalia had no father, and that this was the kindest thing she would ever do for him, sparing his daughter a man like that. He cried, and he said he'd changed, and she said maybe he had, and it had come 2 years too late and 1 dead baby short. He left. She watched the car all the way down the lane, and there wasn't love in her face, and there wasn't hate, just a kind of tiredness that finally had a bottom to it. That evening she rocked her daughter on the porch while the light went gold over the water, and she said to me, quiet, that she used to think strength was something loud, a hard word, a hand raised, a stand made where everybody could see it. She'd learned different. The strongest thing she ever did was carry her people in with her when she went down into that cold river, and the second strongest was knowing when to put a thing down and not pick it back up. They'd called our blood swamp trash dirty beneath their good name, but that name was rotted hollow from the inside, and ours had come up out of the worst this country could do to people, and was still standing here on this porch with a baby on its shoulder. It was never dirty. It was the deepest, oldest gold there is, and now it ran in one more pair of veins, and that child would never, not for 1 day of her life, be made to wonder if she was worth the room she stood in. I have turned this over 1,000 times on that porch with a sleeping baby on my shoulder, and what I keep coming back to is how small the first choice was. My daughter found numbers that didn't add up, and instead of looking away to keep her comfortable life, she went and asked the one question an honest person can't help but ask. That question is what nearly got her killed, and it is also the only reason any of us are still standing. You don't get to choose whether the truth is dangerous. You only get to choose whether you're the kind of person who tells it anyway. She was, and she came by that honest. Granddaddy Eli used to say a person is just the sum of the things they won't do, even when no one's watching, and I watched my girl prove him right in the worst week of both our lives. But being right doesn't keep you alive out here. Wanting justice didn't pull that tracker off my truck. What did was sitting still long enough to think, the way Solomon taught me all over again at that kitchen table. Don't smash the thing, don't rage at it. Send it the wrong way and let them chase an empty road to Texas. Genevieve had money and lawyers and a county half in her pocket, and we beat her with patience and a clear head by knowing that you don't go to the sheriff she bought, you go to the one man whose pride she'd wounded worse than ours. That wasn't luck, that was reading people, which is the only education that ever truly saved my family. And none of it would have mattered if we'd quit. There were nights at that river camp when I was so tired and so scared I could have laid down in the mud beside the branch and not gotten up. Headlights across the water. My daughter crying in her sleep. The not knowing. You hold on anyway, one more hour, one more day, because somewhere behind you is a child who needs you to. That stubborn thing in us, the thing Harlan's wife called dirty, is the very thing that wouldn't break. So if you take anything from an old woman who's seen how this goes, take this. Raise children who won't lie to themselves about what they see. Teach them to keep their heads when the room is on fire, because anger feels like strength and almost never is, and teach them that you can be knocked into a cold river and left for dead and still get up. Still choose your own name over the rich one. Still rock your daughter in the evening light without one drop of poison in your heart. Genevieve had everything and was hollow. My daughter had nothing but us, and she was whole. That's the only inheritance worth a thing, and I watched it pass down one more time the morning little Mahalia came hollering into the world.